Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Code with Italians. Today, let's pretend it's last week, and we're doing our episode on Paparazzi 2.0. And welcome back, John. It's been a while.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It has been a while.
So many things have happened since the last time we were here. And we are going to be seeing what you did, what you worked on with other folks that contribute to Paparazzi. I'm actually quite excited to hear all the great news. But before we start, I think for people that might have missed the first episode, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, my name is John Rodriguez, and I'm an Android engineer working at Duolingo. And I am one of the maintainers of Paparazzi, an open source project that I worked on during my time at CashApp. And its purpose is to allow you to snapshot test your view layer. Typically, engineers are very accustomed to writing all forms of tests on the testing pyramid, whether it's unit or integration. But for a while, view style tests were lacking, or you would have to engage libraries like Robolectric or Espresso, and Paparazzi also offers like an alternative to that.
Got it. So I'm going to put the link to the Paparazzi homepage in the chat for folks that are following along. So, Ivan, do you want to do your thing, and then we can get
Let's
cracking?
go very quickly.
Yes.
So thank you everybody for joining us. If you're watching this live on Twitch, thank you. And I want to remind you that you can subscribe to our Twitch channel for free if you have an Amazon Prime subscription. You can just toggle what? I had some echo, sorry. You can connect your Amazon account to your Twitch account because Uncle Bezos bought everything a couple of years ago, and also is giving us 1 month for free. So you can support us. You can we print stickers, we give away stickers and tickets over the year. So everything is very welcome. Every supporting effort is very welcome. You can also buy the t-shirt on the merch store. You can subscribe as a supporter on Coffee if you want to make it a bit more indie content creator kind of thing. Pardon me. And that's it.
Yep.
Let's go.
Cool. So first of all, I think I want to let me temporarily share my screen with you folks. So wrong one. Display. There you go. So just to show people what Paparazzi is and how it works. John, do you want to go quickly through this minimal example to just see how it looks?
Sure. Yep. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with the project, it's currently implemented as a JUnit 4 test rule. I can talk a bit more about that in a bit. But then what you would do is you instantiate an instance of the Paparazzi rule, configure it as appropriate, and in your tests, you would either inflate if you're still using legacy view semantics, or wrap your composable with the provided method to snapshot that composable. And then there are 3 commands. I'll talk specifically about 2 of them, where you would first record your view, and it would output a snapshot somewhere in the file system. And then at some point, because you've recorded them and you've considered these golden files, that is the expected values of your views at this current point in time, when you make changes later on and then run the verify step, typically on CI, but could be locally as well as a sanity check, if there is any differences in the rendering of the view, that would be the time that it'd be surfaced. Typical unit tests style. I made a change. Is the change what I expected it to be? If I see a change in the snapshot, do I expect that change? Maybe I changed margin. Maybe I changed an icon. But what you want to also catch is the inadvertent changes, where maybe you were changing say now you have a bunch of these snapshots across your repo, and you made a change to one widget, and it's used in 100 screens, and 5 of them have this nuanced layout where it pushed some text over, and so now it's non-ideal, doesn't look as you expected. These are typically the types of bugs that are left uncaught until either QA or a designer or some person looking in the app. Worst case scenario, your users will notice that something looks different. And so, yeah, it's as simple as this. Supply a JRunner rule, write your tests. There is, I kind of hand wave over how simple it is. It will depend to a certain extent on how you architect your views, so your mileage may vary. We have an opinionated stance that your views should have as little, if perfect, ideally zero business logic in it. I know sometimes in the composable world that can be tricky, but if you can stay the course and design your views in such a fashion, it should just be as simple as this. You inflate or create your composable, pass it a model, and take a snapshot.
So out of curiosity, the reason why you don't want to have business logic in the views is that because they can run in the test that way, or is that because you want them to be reproducible? Like, what is the
Sure.
requirement coming from?
I mean, besides the fact that it's probably a good practice anyway, the MV star architectures typically say put your business logic separate from there. But let's just ignore that point for a second. Why is that bad? It's really just gonna result in you having to do more setup now for your views. So if we were testing a presenter and we're injecting collaborators, we'd have to fake or mock those collaborators. Similarly, in your view, you'll have to fake or mock those collaborators as well. And so there is a opinion that if your views are dumb and therefore just getting and setting some sort of model state, those are the nicest type of views to test. I mean, one could argue that's the nicest class or view or object to test, period. And so it kind of extends from that principle.
Right.
So some of the things like, if Dagger, Hilt, not picking on those libraries per se, but just the more that there's a lot of bleeding into your view layer, the more problematic it'll be, one, to test, period, but also then to test with something like Paparazzi. I think of an example where writing, if you use, say, insisted inject or inflation inject to populate your views, now you will have to come up with a way to supply that in your test class path. And so you'll probably have to run Dagger as well to generate that, or mock out what the layout inflator or whatever will be happening in the background. And so that's fine. You can do that. But by kind of pushing that away from the view, it just makes testing a lot more pleasant.
Yeah. I mean, this is the discussion that I had the last time today. So I was curious to hear like the additional reasons, because I'm working on rewriting a bunch of UI in Studio and Compose, and one of the temptations is, I'll just pass a couple of platform things in, and I'll just call them in the UI. And I'm always insisting that actually, no, you should just extract that stuff and just have the event instead, so you can pass an empty lambda and your job is done there. But yeah, it's as you were saying, it can be complicated. It can be a bit more work. I've certainly found situations where I had to rewrite a non-trivial amount of code to make it not injectable, not injected actually. But at the end of the day, my experience is that, first of all, your tests are faster because you don't need to initialize a bunch of stuff. As you were saying, you don't need to run Dagger, or you don't need to do whatever step you need to do beforehand. Plus, you don't, I guess, you don't run into the temptation of mocking everything, which is probably just also bad. So Yeah.
I mean, what if you want to test the mocks, Sebastian?
I mean, I've seen that.
like so many people.
Some people like
I mean,
testing Mockito.
yeah, that's the thing, right? I'm testing the mocking
I'm not
library. I mean,
judging. I'm not judging.
no.
To each their own.
But jokes aside, I totally agree on the things are way easier if you just don't care, right? So let's get a global variable in this thing. Yeah, let's throw everything. I'm gonna just access everything from the view. It's easier. Yeah, nobody has to know. They will never know. But then you can't actually test it, right? I mean, you can probably test it. It's painful to test. Probably that's the decision that you have to take at some point. Do I want it to be easy to test or easy to write and forget and move on, right? So that's the probably the main decision most of the time.
And kind of digging in there a bit, that's totally accurate, Ivan, is that as to test something on Android, you need the Android platform. And so if you're running something as a unit test, you'll have that mockable Android.jar that will stub out all the platform classes with nulls if you set that bespoke setting in your build.gradle. Or if you say use Robolectric, it will use its own mocked version of Android in the form of Robolectric native graphics. If you use Compose Previews and Layout Inspector in the IDE, it's going to use LayoutLib, which is its own mocked version of the Android platform. And Paparazzi made the decision to use that same mechanism with LayoutLib. And so like there are many ways to basically mock out Android. And that's fine. And these libraries do it to various levels of success. But it also should force the question of like, why are we in this situation? If we have to obviously draw to a canvas, you need the Skia like graphics pipeline to do so. But do we also need to add more pain by including more Android like dependencies, especially in our view layer? Because then we'd have to consider mocking those out. I know there might be a kind of backwards logic to kind of go about, but think about it in your presenters when you're trying to test intents or Android bitmaps. You'd probably then have to either run an instrumentation unit test or use Robolectric to run it locally. Or you could coerce your intent into, say, something like a map or your bitmap into something like a byte array. And from a JVM perspective, you're still testing similar concepts. But once you kind of now cross the boundary into the Android platform specifics, you've now added a whole cost to your testing cycle. And again, I'm not trying to be too opinionated on that, but I think a corollary that anyone, whether you're an Android developer or otherwise, can relate to is the more hurdles that you add to testing will indirectly, if not directly, affect your likelihood to add tests. Adding tests is a good thing. Maybe you have no tests. Maybe you're trying to increase it. But the more hurdles you had, you'll find like sort of edge cases. If a class doesn't have test coverage, are you gonna pay the explorer's tax of writing that test? Yes, yeah. You'll be a good Samaritan. But let's be real. We have deadlines, priorities. We may kind of push that to the side. If tests are so easy where you don't even have to play that mental calculus, you'll just write them more. There's a really good talk by Jesse Wilson from AndroidCon years ago about talking about code that lasts forever or to the future. I forget the exact name of it, but he calls this out in that as well. It's just the fewer barriers you have to test and make mistakes, the more you will test.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, put the link in the chat.
Thank you. I mean, somebody at some point has to do the first groundwork to set up things, right? And maybe it's you. Maybe you find it already there, But again, if it's easier to add one more test, probably it's not even a question, right? Should I add tests? I mean, I did the same with Jewel, and at some point we wanted to write some tests for the component that I'm working, and I was like, compose test, I don't know. And Sebastian was like, okay, let's do it together. It took like 5 minutes to come up with the first setup. Oh yeah, the compose rule, and this is how you do a node, and this is how you test. And I was like, okay, well, this is good. Wow, now we have like dozens of tests because I get paranoid and I don't want to work without. I mean,
there was only a minor confusion about the difference between displayed and existing.
man, I had that thing. You keep
that gets
me
everyone.
That
don't
shit.
worry, that gets everyone.
Because yeah, it is displayed or does exist, and I was like, okay, and then you need to look at the fine print and say which one is it? Is it in the tree? Is it on the screen? But again, once you get the ball rolling, I think it's a no-brainer, and it's definitely useful for the future you has. But I have zero experience with the snapshot testing. They were using it on iOS when we were working when I was working for the Body Coach. Sebastian, you remember a few years ago, the iOS people were doing screenshot testing. Again, I feel that we could use screenshot tests for Jewel. You also have a card that hopefully at some point we will address. So I really want some example for this, if you are willing to show.
I mean,
Sure.
I don't think Paparazzi now is multi-platform, but maybe one day.
Oh,
I
yeah,
guess the
fair
dependency
enough.
on layout lib is
I'm
the
happy
problem.
to talk about that. It's been asked, and I think the question would be like, what would that look like? Because right now Paparazzi depends heavily on layout lib, which is an Android only thing. So like, it'd be really nice to say, hey, will layout lib be multi-platform? Will it be used to render iOS views? Or you could go a step further and say we'd have a shim that if Android run layout lib, otherwise run something else. Then the next question would be, what will be that thing? I imagine like some Skiko variant to run iOS views. That's possible. I am not going to lie, I know very little about that space, but that could be a problem that we take on and try to solve. But as a testing framework, I'm not sure. Maybe another answer would be like the iOS tools that exist today are enough. Like, what would be the value add? iOS engineers are going to probably write their tests in their repo, and they're okay with that. Android engineers are going to write their UI tests in their repos. What would be if it's really like a wrapper that just immediately has a conditional logic that detects the platform and then routes to a completely isolated thing with minimal sharing, then maybe, I don't know. But it has been asked. We'd have to give some more thought to it. What we kind of were thinking, though, is could we use a multi-platform perspective as like rendering in, say, a Compose multi-platform app? Think of essentially if you could run Compose previews or Layout Inspector as a separate app, not bundled in the IDE. And not necessarily for development, but for other things like testing a Figma design and getting either designers or backend engineers to map from that Figma design using whatever sort of mapping language to go from design to the actual schema definition of what a view is. If you've followed some of the CashApp Redwood and Zipline talks that Jesse and Jake have given in the past, they talk about where you describe your UI schema from the back end and render it into Android, iOS, or even web platforms. And then so this could be a really huge value add where instead of having your backend engineers download Android Studio and ADB and figure out how to see how a view looks in the emulator, and good luck trying to get a designer to do that because that's like a whole tool chain that's not within their like comfort level in most cases. Why should it even need to? One could make an argument for. So now we have another means of being able to do that by parsing the Figma design and the mapping rules and rendering something for Android only. And then I guess then once that becomes a thing, maybe the value add of saying, hey, can we do an iOS style rendering would come afterwards. So I'm not saying it's no. I would love to flesh out the use cases a little more to figure out like, is this something meaningful to work on? So please, like, If anyone has ideas, if any iOS engineers are following this podcast and want to collab on that, totally open. Probably just not the next phase of development for Paparazzi.
Cool. So yeah, just what I think even what you probably will end up doing is using the extremely basic capabilities included in Compose for Desktop UI testing for capturing a bitmap. I think
bitmap,
they
yeah.
have like a sort of a built-in uh, screenshot, like gold screenshot comparison thing, but I also don't know how good it is. Because if I recall
Yeah, just-
correctly, at some point it was only comparing, like it was like taking the bytes for the image and comparing the bytes for the gold image, which is not very useful, especially because you might have a different image encoder that results in the same or very, very similar image within a meaningful, like a very small margin of error in the colors, because maybe it applies dithering or whatever. So
Yeah. We actually hit that issue recently in Paparazzi. We were striving for pixel perfection for quite a while now, and trying to do everything we could to achieve that. But then after I think a chat in one of the Slack domains around Android development, I was schooled by people who know graphics a lot better than me. That ultimately, I think the question I asked, again, naive question, was, "Hey, how do I get this string to render?" Let's say I choose the most basic font and I want to turn off anti-aliasing so that it looks pixel perfect. And I think the response I got originally was like, why would you even want to do this? You should respect the platform. Because I get it, like, if Android Studio runs on Mac OS, it should look like the Mac OS, UI style toolkit, how it renders. I'm butchering this. I apologize.
yeah, it's fine.
Not a graphics expert. And similarly on Windows, you should expect it to look a certain way. And so, and I digress to that. I don't necessarily everything to look the same. Like the days of Qt and trying to get all UIs to look the same is way past us. But what if I still wanted to just course this string? Can I, for my own side benefit? And it turns out there are things in like the JVM, like, that say, hey, if you're on Mac OS 14 plus and you try to turn off anti-aliasing, haha, you can't turn it back on. I think there's just something about how graphics work on certain platforms that they just have opinions, as we all do, and how they choose to do things like dithering or gradients can differ. It's just, I naively thought there's just one math equation that if you say start to end and apply a gradient, that you can mathematically assert what the RGBA values are for every single pixel in an image. And it turns out that's not really the case. And trying to do so is painful. So what do we do then? For now, we found out that the RGB values are off by 2 values in their components, and so that is not the end all. That's not, it's a nice comfort zone for now to unblock certain things. But again, chatting with people who are much better at this than I am, schooled me on like some algorithms that we could use to do similarity differences. I know in the Android X repo, they are using SSIM, which is, I think, based on a paper from the University of Waterloo. And there's also things, I think, flip and sift are other ways. I don't know what the pros and cons are or what the performance characteristics are, but the idea is like, if they're close enough. What we did up until now, and I've never really been satisfied with, is we say max percent difference, where over the vast pool of pixels, if you're within 0.1%, that's okay. And surprisingly, it's gotten us decently far, but I mean, at least in the repos I've worked in, I'm sure there are other people who are like, this library sucks, it doesn't apply anything right. And I apologize, please send me more issues. But I think it's working okay, but it's not great, because if you it's not biased to know whether an intentional icon shift was meant to be a certain way. I mean, as the name implies, max percent diff is a very naive algorithm. Yeah, there are smarter ways to do similarity comparisons. I spoke to someone at the last DroidCon that asserts that you can get pixel perfection If you choose to record your images on the same platform as verification, so meaning
Yeah.
like don't record locally, record on CI always, that's another approach. I'm still trying to really understand the use cases of that, because I feel like what would determine whether an image is actually the golden file other than a human. I guess I need to really kind of understand the use cases better on this. Like always recording when there is a change kind of seems to defeat the purpose. That kind of seems like any change is tolerable. But again, I'm only familiar with the workflows that I've worked with.
Yeah, I mean, from experience, I can tell you that, especially when you're working on desktop, but it's the same even across different Android versions. The madness that is comparing screenshots across different platforms, different versions of the platform, different versions of the runtime, the Java runtime, and different Java runtimes. Those are all like the first thing that you notice is gonna break if you do a naive comparison is text rendering, because every platform renders text in a different way. Some are better at anti-aliasing than others. Some are better at measuring the text and positioning the text, so the anti-aliasing will look different.
Yeah.
There are some fonts we found out that are broken on Windows.
Spectacular.
Yeah.
I mean, you find out. I was like, this feels kind of okay, and then you show me the Mac version. I was like, oh, now I see. And
worse in earlier versions of the JDK. I think Paparazzi originally launched on JDK 8, and then as the Android Gradle plugin migrated to 11, and I think now 17. We noticed the difference between the Oracle JDK and I believe now we use Zulu. Things on the like font rendering layer, like when you start going to like sun.font as your package namespace, you're in the weeds of how fonts work. I mean, it's fascinating, but I imagine not many people nerd out on this type of thing like I do.
I did.
yeah, exactly. There you go. And so, yeah, what you realize is that, it's software, and software has bugs. And I believe the more rapid iteration cycles of the JDK can only be a positive. The changes, the slowness of change between 8 and 11 versus, say, 11 and 17, when software gets updated faster, bugs get resolved quicker, hopefully resulting in fewer bugs. And we've definitely experienced that. But again, like even if things are bugless, things like dithering and gradients and stuff that are still going to be platform specific are just unavoidable.
Yeah,
but something. So you say platform specific, but I wonder, because I really not familiar with this enough even to have an opinion. So I only have stupid questions. But so if so much changes from platform to platform, again, would it make sense to run this on the CI that it feels like a more controllable environment? So is it a stupid thing to? I mean, are you running? So if how do you imagine the workflow? Because I mean, probably that's the part that I'm missing. Let's say I start with this. I'm the first developer, and I need the golden images, as you call them, right? So I write a few tests for views or screens. Depends how big the granularity is. Let's say like composable. And then I run the thing. I guess an emulator pops up, and it takes a few screenshots of what I need, and I end up with a few PNGs in a folder.
There is no emulator in this case. Like it runs in the JVM.
Okay, so it's even better. So it's
or worse.
So there is no. Fair enough.
The emulator is probably more uniform across platforms.
Okay. So again, sure. Okay, let's assume we run this and now I have a folder of images. And what do? I commit them to Git, I guess. And now we have like a snapshot of today.
Yep. If you run them locally, it'll write the file to disk in a predefined folder. You would probably commit it to Git, hopefully using Git LFS, so that you don't pay the cost of checking out a project at various points in the future. But if you don't, and your project's small enough, should be fine as is. We've had also feature requests to not necessarily check it into the repo, but maybe to an NFS like share or S3, and that's definitely something we're exploring. But to tackle the root of your question, if you run this on CI, how does this look? And again, admittedly, this is the use case that I haven't fleshed out yet and would like more inputs. But I'd imagine then what it feels like to me now is you lose control as a test author to denote what that golden file is easily, right? Like right now, if you will visually compare the expected to the actual, and say, okay, this is how it should look, this is how it shouldn't look, and if so, commit it, push it. Now I have updated the golden, or I look into my code, I revert the change and try running it again once, try recording again, I should say, once I've updated the code change. Now that's how it is today. Now you move to the way that you're suggesting to CI. CI detects a change in the golden file. Is that an expected change or is that a bug? How will you define that? You could have workflows where there's a web interface where on CI you now kind of endorse that new file as the new golden.
I mean,
you could do that.
You need tooling in the cloud.
You need
you are moving to the cloud.
Maybe much. Then you pull the branch and you set something, a property, so that you don't need to do it in the cloud. You could do it locally, but now you need CI to kind of tell you that the thing was the problem versus local. I don't know. Maybe that's okay, but it feels like it's a longer iteration cycle. Is kind of, I guess, the premise of my current premise as to why we haven't done it that way.
So the way you are using this is everything is local. You have the golden images run. So who generates the golden image, for instance?
You would generate it as a developer. You'd run the record task.
Yeah, but from a team point of view, if everything changes a bit from platform to platforms, if Sebastiano runs this thing on Mac and I change the screen on Windows, and will it match? Let's say I don't touch the screen. If so I run
so today, if you change the file, if you're updating a file or you're making a code change, and now when you run it, you see updates, it is either a bug or there's a platform specific difference that which we had up till now said this should never happen. If there's a platform difference, let's fix that. And if there was some that we just quite frankly didn't understand, you would then tweak your max % difference to 0.1, which wasn't great, but was rarely used, at least from what we saw in practice, and therefore was kind of like, okay, kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
Now with this off by 2 differ as a short-term workaround, and the more, I guess, sophisticated differs in the long term, you will allow platform-specific differences to be acceptable. But again, this will involve some perception in your eyes. Like a very classic example of this is if you would get like this weird alias effect around the navigation bar, like the system navigation bar, where you get like the triangle and the circle, and the way that it pixelated a round circle or a triangle could sometimes have these literally 5 or 6 differing pixels in an entire high resolution screen. And those values would literally be off by 1 or 2 RGB values, which is why we go, okay, off by 2. And so these are annoying, and I don't understand why that's the type of thing that fails on different platforms. But it was annoying enough where putting like 0.01 max % difference was annoying to people. And it deservedly so. Like this should never really happen in your day-to-day, and it's confusing when it does because you won't necessarily see those 5 pixels. So now you have to go to like an image editor and look for their pixels, and then once you do, you're kind of like, WTF? What is this framework doing? So that's kind of the kind of work, the kind of the history, I guess, behind why we did that.
So considering that what I feel is the problem here is that at least some of this inconsistency due to it's due to the difference in platform. So what if you shipped your computer? And I don't mean like literally, but Docker maybe could be a solution where you have like a lightweight Docker image that has just a JVM, and it will install Gradle, map the sources files, and run the task in there. I'm making it easy. I'm sure it's gonna be a pain in the ass to make this happen, but that might be a way, because yeah, maybe Linux is the worst OS for rendering, but at least it renders badly consistently instead of rendering badly only on Linux or only on Windows or only on Mac.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that. It seems like Linux and Windows have been roughly agreeing with each other, and Mac OS tends to be the outlier.
Mac does text in a very different way, and that's one thing. And also, I think it does anti-aliasing slightly differently as well. But I mean, if you've looked into the sun.font implementation, you know that macOS has its own implementation, and Windows and Linux use like on macOS the JVM is like, okay, macOS, you take care of this, and on Windows and Linux is like, oh, I'll load the font, I'll read what's in the font. So yeah, that's
But you know, Docker could be something to explore, because you know, dev containers. Are you familiar with dev containers? So it's something that I learned about a few months ago doing Rails. Okay, so how they managed to provide the same developer environment to everybody in the team. Why? I'm working on Windows, I'm working on Mac, I'm working on Linux, but everybody has to run Ruby, Python, Go, whatever, right? So they came up with basically this dev container concept that is pretty much just a file, a JSON file that tells Docker desktop, in my case, how to spin up a container, and now you are actually working in a container. So it's easier for web, I guess, but now everybody has the same environment that is also the same environment that you ship basically to production. So you don't have to install anything else on your computer, because now you live in the tiny Ubuntu. You work, you know, in the tiny Ubuntu that is the same tiny Ubuntu that you eventually ship also to production. Now, you can't do that with Android because you can't run Android in a container, but maybe you can run, actually, as Sebastiano said, you can run the whole testing pipeline in a container, and that will be the same whoever is running it, right? They just need Docker.
So is the suggestion here that now, assuming the same code that you saw in the example in the docs, that now that test rule with background and potentially cache a Docker container, maybe sync updates to its config as needed,
I think doing it in the rule would be extremely painful, but maybe you have a Gradle plugin that does that, because I think that there is a Gradle Docker plugin that can manage the Docker containers. So maybe what you need to do is you need a Gradle plugin that spins up the Docker container, points it to the code, and just essentially runs the same build but with a different task in the container.
So this is a good idea.
Will it work though?
I'm sure we could make that work. The other thing though that it brings to mind is, and we have this discussion among the team a lot, is we are a Gradle plugin, and if you've seen my talk history, you know that I love Gradle and I nerd out on Gradle things as well. But we really tried to make a mindful design decision to not let Gradle bleed into the rule. So we have a Gradle plugin, that hooks into the ecosystem of your build, and will add the test dependency automatically for you. So you can, but you never have to do implementation paparazzi, right? You just apply the plugin and it does that using Gradle magic. And then we pass around system properties from the plugin that then the rule and soon to be SDK, I can talk a bit about that, we'll look for to bootstrap. And we do this because conceivably, if you wanted to come and write a Bazel plugin or whatever, you should be able to do so and not bake that in. Now, one of the other things you may notice if you follow the repo is that we've been weaning as much as we can off of, in the Gradle plugin, we heavily depend on the Android Gradle plugin to tell us where all the things are. And when we did this rewrite about a year or so ago on how we load resources, what we wind up doing is, instead of looking where Android Gradle plugin has the merge resources, which it's an implementation detail, we shouldn't have been looking there, but Hack Week and moving things forward, it made sense. We really want to kind of follow how Android Studio, the IDE, is doing it, where it essentially does a lot of the things that the Android Gradle plugin would do, but on its own. And so you don't have to run apt to get the merge resources. You can just explore the file system and load your resources accordingly. One of the nice things of now moving from our own packaged version of LayoutLib to the Google published version of LayoutLib is that it provides the framework resources as part of that artifact. And so before, we would say Android Gradle plugin, find the the environment variable Android home and look for your library SDK, because the framework resources were living there. And then if you had a clean laptop and you forgot to install that, Paparazzi would fail because it'd say, hey, you have no framework resources. Now that goes away because it's bundled in LayoutLib. And so that allowed us to kind of prune more dependencies out of the Gradle plugin. So a common theme you may see in my reviews of PRs is when people try to add more stuff to the plugin, because I get it. It's very inviting. It's like, hey, the plugin, it's the same hammer to hit all the nails, just plug it in there. But then I will think of, okay, did we just make it harder? And maybe the answer is we'll never have Bazel support, or there'll never be another build tool. Gradle is here forever and we love it.
Ask
but
how much he loves it.
Sure, yeah. So I'd like to at least try to kind of keep that in as part of the design. And yeah, again, happy to hear more feedback if that is a silly way to if that's not the hill to die on, if you will. But when kind of now going back to that Docker idea via Gradle plugin, yeah, we could make it work. But now what happens now if you don't have a Gradle build? I've added now a huge hurdle where this Docker thing wouldn't be available to you as well.
The way I was thinking this though
to that thing,
would be that you have two separate tasks, or you have just one task, which is the one that spins up the container and essentially runs the existing build. So it's an optional thing. You don't have to do that. You can run the test on your machine directly if you want, but also the plugin could, if you want, again, facilitate spinning up the Docker container for you. So that could be a recommendation, but not a mandatory thing.
Would that not be potentially more confusing now because the Docker container runs a different OS? Remember, we're trying to solve the multi-platform rendering artifacts. So if you have the Docker container, you will, I guess, quote unquote, always have the potential for pixel perfection because you're running the same OS. But if you don't, now you just have to accept this overhead of potentially having a difference. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
But
that's your choice then, right?
I don't know if people choose the build tool that their repo lives on. I mean, yeah, as indie developers, maybe you do, but if you work at a company and they've made that decision, it could be a limiting factor. People, I think, ultimately decide whether to use Paparazzi or not by the feature set that it provides or does not provide at the moment.
Yeah, of course. But it is if you have the Docker image and you document how to run it, the fact that it's run by a Gradle task or by a Bazel task or by something, it doesn't really matter, right? The only thing is that you have a minimal like setup jumpstart task in Gradle that can do that for you. It could even be a separate plugin if you want, because that way it's entirely decoupled. It's a nice thing that you offer, but it's not necessary.
And you know, the nice thing of having the pipeline running locally with Docker is that's basically pretty much the same stuff that you have on the CI.
Yeah,
the CI is doing the same thing.
Except you're running it on your local laptop, which that's the part I've been kind of ignoring.
But that's the thing.
Like I hate when I have to install like backend systems.
Yes, but on the other hand, iterating is much faster at that point. Like you can do the local iteration that you were talking about earlier, which is I am still in control of the outputs before I commit them and before I push them, which is something that on the CI you don't really get.
I'm already giving.
But now you don't. Sorry, please.
I was saying I'm already giving AGP and lint in the IDE 64 gigs of RAM, and now I have to worry about giving. And now I have to give a little bit to a Docker container. I mean,
just for more RAM. Just download more RAM.
Fellas, I don't
want to. For the sake of the discussion, I'm running Docker all the time, and I forget a lot of containers running all the time.
Oh, that's why your computer was so slow today building.
No, that's not it, because that was just Gradle killing me. But jokes aside, I think it could be something to look into, because it will ease up a bit everybody's running this on. So instead of fighting the differences between platforms, now you basically made your test runner agnostic, right? It's running on Linux. Whoever is running it, it's gonna be running on Linux. As bad as it could be, but again, as Sebastiano said, it's gonna be the same bad rendering all the time. Consistently bad. And if your goal is to compare things, you don't really care, right? Because if it's consistently bad, the moment it changes badly, quote unquote. But again, it's gonna be legit, right? It's not gonna be an artifact of the anti-aliasing on iOS on macOS is different. It's gonna be we changed something because it's the same anti-aliasing on Linux that we had last week. Is also the current anti-aliasing on Linux because it's a Docker container. So if it's flagging something, it's because something changed.
Or because you changed the Docker image.
Yeah. I mean,
but that's the thing. A Docker image has a configuration file.
Yeah.
So you can keep it the same forever, and that's why Docker exists. You want to run Ubuntu from 10 years ago? Sure, go for it. You can lock the JDK and things like that.
Absolutely, I love the passion for Docker in the room.
No, it's just because I was thinking about how. So it worked.
He does Rails on his spare time. That's the problem.
No. But we were solving an issue, like things are different.
But maybe it doesn't
platforms.
even work. We don't know. We haven't tried. Like mine was just an off-the-cuff idea. I don't know if it works to begin with.
Yeah. No, and I think it's a great idea. I want to pull that thread on the comparator a little more though, because at least from the people that provided that advice, like maybe if you see that you're doing comparison with SSIM or Flip or what have you, and you see that like the gradient or whatever, that shadow difference is almost imperceptible, it surfaces to you and says, hey, these are similar and we think it's okay to go. Here are the differences. You might just go, that's fine. And you might be just willing to accept that difference because you don't care at the end of the day what those differences are, and you can get that feedback faster. I hear you on the it's almost nerd sniping me because I really do want pixel perfection, but at the same time, I'm
Sorry,
still thinking
John.
that the total cost of ownership of that Docker container, I feel like is going to be a really hard sell. I mean, because it's not just making it work and caching it, it's also updating it, and now Docker bugs become your bugs. I mean,
Yeah.
layout lib bugs already become our bugs. So I don't know how much I want to spread that from
Yeah. I mean, that is
but
definitely a downside. You need to maintain a Docker YAML file with all the
yeah.
configuration and sure.
I mean, maybe Yvonne is really gung ho about
Yeah.
support. Maybe like
It
paparazzi
sounds
X
like
Docker.
Ivan was volunteering.
I did hear that. I did hear that.
Yeah.
I heard it here. Everyone heard it too.
No, but joke aside, it's at some point you
Who
need
was
to
joking?
no. But again, the thing that you said, oh, I run it locally, I have those few pixels, they're different, and it's good, and I accept them. Nothing changed, but those pixels are, even it's a false positive kind of thing. I accept that. I think that's just a decision. How painful that decision is compared to the Docker possible painful decision, right? So,
Yeah.
and as you said, it depends on how much friction you want to put on the people joining the screenshot testing world. It's not for everybody. Just you need Android Studio and now you need also Docker desktop, and you're like, what are you talking about? And now you're like, okay, so it's
At that point, you might as well download Android Studio, ADB, and emulator, and just do it like that, right? That's the whole selling point to not do all that. But I get it. No, I think this is helpful. This is really good, helpful food for thought.
By the way, there is another suggestion from the chat, which is what about recreating the golden images on each computer with the last merged code? So if you pull a code, generate new golden images for your machine, and then you'll run your last changes versus that. I guess that means you would have to have like a script or something that checks out the main branch, builds the main branch, pulls off the golden image, stores them somewhere that is not the repo, and then you switch back to the current branch. That sounds like it could work, but also it could fail in many ways. I don't know, because
I'm not understanding what this actually solves. So if you go to a different branch, like you'll also be minus the code changes that could update the golden file. So
yeah, essentially assuming, I guess, that you work off the main branch and just merge your changes at the end, so feature branches. I think the idea, what I'm reading, is that you check out main, you build the golden files there, and you store them somewhere outside of the repo in the file system or in a ignored folder. And then you go back to your branch and then run the verify task instead of the snapshot one.
So basically, every developer has their own golden images, basically.
Yeah. So golden images don't really exist. They are in the high of the beholder. It also depends if you forget to update the golden images on the main branch. I think that will painful.
This is to solve like, hey, if Sebastiano like check this in on Windows and it's now in my file system, I don't want to rely on that Windows image. I want to rely on my own image, but point to that. That's interesting. That is interesting. Test.
And you can do it by commit. Yeah, you can do it by commit. You can cut a commit, and then you build your own version of the golden images for those commits. Or, I mean, yes.
Well, the good news is that in the version of Git that they released this week, they finally had a way to figure out what is the parent commit of a branch. So you can finally figure out in a sensible way, oh, my branch started at this commit. So you could theoretically go to that commit, run, go back to the current commit. But does that work? I don't know. Probably. maybe. Does it break? How does it break? I also don't know.
Yeah.
And I guess you still have the thing that if I don't know if that's a thing, but John, do you see value in having the gold images in general? Like are the images just a byproduct you never look at and you only rely on for comparison, or do you look at them?
So that's a good point, and a good nice segue into, I guess, both a past feature and a potentially future feature. So you may notice I mentioned 2 commands, but there were really 3 commands. I said record and verify. We had a third command, which is the normal testing route that would produce this report. And the idea is that it'd be a very basic, like I learned HTML and JavaScript yesterday type of page, where it would show all the changes to a view over time that you could scrub over and see like the iteration effort. This is before the Compose preview was a thing, and so we thought that might be a value add. That will likely go away because it's undiscoverable. I don't think it's even helpful. But what could be the future version that I thought about just in this past DroidCon NYC is not kind of going against my let's not double down on Gradle plugin thing. One thing that you could do using Gradle configurations is say propagate on the app level, propagate all the snapshots from your modules up to the root, and come up with this concept of a snapshot browser, a snapshot catalog. At Cache, we had a snapshot browser that we had external to Paparazzi, where we just knew the known file paths, hard-coded stuff, and we were able to show that as a way to kind of show designers like, hey, what do we have snapshot coverage for? Does this look okay? Again, the common theme is pushing verification of this, whether visual or automated, earlier in the pipeline, in the test pipeline, so that a bug caught earlier is cheaper than one caught later. The whole corollary to that is same thing with snapshots. And so can we build that into Paparazzi, where assuming you use it in all your modules, or even incrementally in some of your modules, you'll add an additional benefit, or you'd have a sort of browser. If you remember what Square Spoon was, it was a way to kind of show your espresso test snapshot output in a way that you could dive in by dimensions, like show me all dark mode screens, or show me all pixel whatever latest is screens, or show me landscape images. And so doubling down on the ability to tag your snapshots, which we offer as a feature but is not really well developed, we could then say, okay, now when you take your snapshots, you will tag it, and you would have to provide some taxonomy to how you tag these. But then at the root level, if you're consistent, you'll now have this browser that will be able to group these snapshots in a certain way. I think would be a nice a feature to add. And then, yes, you would use these snapshots a lot more. Right now, I guess, to answer your question, not really looked at, except for GitHub PRs are very helpful to see the diffs. And also in the IDE when you're just doing a sanity check. But besides the diff, when do you look for those images? I'd still say there's a small value, and not the greatest. I'm going from strongest to weakest argument, but like the weakest argument is if I'm touching a view that I've never seen before, and I could maybe it's not on Compose yet. Maybe I have a sync issue and I don't want to deal with that because my IDE is slow. Like, I just want to open the snapshot and see the rendering of that view, and I could go like, oh, I'm not in the right place. It should be in a different module. I think there's some incremental value to looking at those images, but that's not for certain the original use case of Paparazzi. And what I kind of just described there was like the v0.001 of the snapshot browser. So maybe we should just surface that better and call it a snapshot browser.
What I was thinking could also be sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes a PM asks, hey, how does this look today? So, having the screenshot ready could have some value in that case, but it's a very edge case, very niche.
It's a long-term benefit, not an initial benefit, but that's the point. We want to make the library more valuable to the test community, and not only the test community, because as I kind of hinted before, it's currently a JUnit rule, but we're moving a JUnit 4 rule. So people who use JUnit 5 on Android, I'm sorry, JUnit 5 is like not. I love JUnit 4 more than JUnit 5, but I get it. It's a thing that people use. And so we should be able to support it, and we don't. And so in order to do that, we want to move the core of the rule that currently exists to something more of an SDK. And so that'll serve not only the purpose of allowing you to do any test rule. If you use, I don't know who uses TestNG. I didn't even know that was a testing framework, but Grail tells me that's a thing you could supply in your build scripts. But you could also then use it on a command line application, or as I mentioned earlier, a compose multi-platform app to take a snapshot. So it's taking the verification assertion part of the rule and really just looking at Paparazzi as a snapshotter, which is, again, just really a wrapper around layout-lib/compose preview. If that was its own separate app from Android Studio and able to be used for other purposes, Paparazzi would probably have less of a use case today.
Yeah, and I heard, I think it was this week, someone mentioning JUnit 6. So I don't know if that's happening, but if it's happening, hey.
A side project that I'll never have time to do, because who has all the time in the world? KUnit. Let's just do a new unit testing framework and say goodbye to JUnit. Yeah.
I mean, that would be cool, but also, yeah, who has time for that?
Yeah. Ivan, I'm gonna give you all the side projects.
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
He has so many side projects. It's insane.
I only do web in my spare time, so thank you.
You like simple things like CSS.
Assembly unit.
Jokes aside, I like things that, you know, Sonnet and GPT can help me with.
Oh, so you like asking others to write your code?
Oh man, you have no idea the joy of being on an HTML page with CSS and asking the machine, take out the text button and replace it with the icon button, and the thing just gives you the SVG, and you copy paste the SVG. Perfect. That's it. Can you make it a bit smaller? Smaller. Try to do this with Compose or with Android. It's just gonna be so depressing. So, you know, web is fine. Web is old. Old is boring. Boring is good.
I mean, you say that, but if you're using the framework of the week, it's probably just as fucked.
No, that's the thing. So you
just
have
use
to
Rails. It hasn't changed in 20 years.
You can use PHP, Python, Rails, something that has been there before your junior colleague.
Perl.
If it's older than your junior colleague, you're good to go. The machine is gonna be able to help you. And now you basically have a bunch of junior colleagues that is just a machine. You know, it's like you have a team of junior developers just for you. I'm enjoying it.
I just realized that we have like 20 minutes and we haven't started talking about 2.0 yet. So
yeah,
maybe
I wanted to.
We got distracted by Docker.
Sorry.
Paparazzi 2.0. It's all a Docker container.
That's Paparazzi 3. It's just an AI.
There was another point that I wanted to make before talking about 2.0, but I'm forgetting right now, so I'll come back to it.
Yep.
So yeah, 2.0. So if you follow the repo, you've probably seen a lot of parallel efforts. The SDK-ifying of Paparazzi is a core part to 2.0.
So that is the main why 2.0 is happening.
No, it was one of the major motivations because we want to change the API, right? So breaking changes are best reserved for a major release. There's a lot of moving parts like around Gradle caching and bug fixes from the community, which has delayed the 1.35 release, which I know people have been asking for the past month. And on the one hand, I want to say my bad to everyone, but on the other side, it's like we're trying to kind of make sure that our next release doesn't break people like the last release did. So like we released in the people who tried to use 1.34 in order to get the animated GIF support, realized that it was broken due to like Gradle caching bugs, and we hadn't yet released a new version to account for that. So people are really stuck on, a lot of people are still stuck on 1.3.3, which isn't great. So we want to get out faster cycles, but we've also been trying to fix a variety of things at the same time that's kind of changed our focus in the past few months. And so I think we're finally going to get that release out soon. I wanted to do it today, yesterday, and now it's looking like it's bleeding into tomorrow. But I'd like to say this week, asterisk, don't hold me to that if something happens. But like
we don't make
soon.
announcements about future releases or something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Open source dev is hard, yeah, because if you're lucky enough to do it in your day-to-day job, then fine. If not, then it's usually where you can find time and stuff like that. So but that being said, we're trying to get that out this week, and that'll provide a lot of just bug fixes and Gradle improvements. For 2.0, there's been a long-lived set of PRs around providing finally preview annotation support. So
nice.
the Android plugin, this has been under development on the cache side since before the preview snapshot plugin was released on Google's end. And part of the back and forth has been about implementation detail, but we think we'll land that immediately in a 2.0, and my goal is to land that in an alpha. So even though we're going to release again 1.3.5 this week, you should be able to test an alpha for 2.0 very soon thereafter, knowing that it's an alpha, but at least being able to play around with it. I encourage people to use the alphas. I know work cultures may dictate that alphas and betas are not ideal and that you want to wait for something to ship to production. I have a strong bias to not liking that approach, because if you want to shape the development and the prioritization of what we work on in Paparazzi, adopting early helps that process. But I understand we all have, job.
There's also the thing that if you find a bug in a stable version, it's going to take a long time for that bug to be fixed in the next stable version.
I mean, depends
it might
on how
be fixed
the bug is, but yes.
Yeah, it might be fixed in the alpha next week, but it might take a month to get to the next dot release in stable.
Exactly. So again, help yourself out by testing the alphas, even if you don't land it on your main trunk master branch. At least shoot a draft PR in your respective repos to kick the tires and let us know what's going on with the project. If you like something, even if it's provide positive feedback, we love positive feedback as well, not just bug reports.
A bug report saying great job.
Yeah, exactly.
No bugs to report.
No bugs to report. Just wanted to say awesome library. No, I'm kidding.
So I mean, that makes you smile.
Yeah, preview annotations. So preview annotations, SDK-ifying Paparazzi, and then some API changes. The goal would be to, in order to SDK-ify the library, we have to remove yet another portion of how resources are handled in Android. So we did a part of it, as I mentioned, that loads resources from the file system and puts it into a three-dimensional map. I talked about this a little more in Android DroidCon NYC. Watch the talk when it comes out on that. But really then on the other side of it, r.jar. So you need r.jar to be compiled, but that's an Android thing. So as I said, if we want to depend less on Android things, how do we do that? Well, we need to be able to generate those r.jars on the fly. And it turns out Android Studio does that. So we're going to try to lean into more ASM. Right now, what we do is we use
a name I haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, so everyone does some sort of bytecode magic to do this Android jar mocking I mentioned. Robolectric does their own. LayoutLib does its own. Originally, I used a tool called ByteBuddy because it seemed like a nice kind of bridge between hardcore ASM. I'm not an ASM expert, and at the time I really didn't want to become one. So I used that as like a way to kind of do a poor man's version of Robolectric Shadows. But it causes problems. You might have seen issues with Paparazzi. If a Paparazzi test lives in the same source file as Robolectric or anything with Makito, they all collide with each other, and that's not great. I'd like to think Paparazzi is currently the reason for that, although I don't know. In investigations, we may find out it's not just us, and we'll file an issue with the appropriate other framework. But right now, we want to make sure that they could play nicely. One thing that the preview snapshot plugin from Google is doing is creating an entirely new source set. While not strongly opposed to that, I think it's really just a workaround to avoid this very problem. Like at the end of the day, having your tests in yet another area just seems like another hurdle to writing tests, especially because you probably don't have business logic tests in your view modules anyway, if you do have view modules. But again, I'm not gonna go too hard on that hill. We're open to it, but right now we're trying to see if we can just make this work. I feel like it's easier to make that work than to pull that all into a whole source set, because the moment that you create another source set, you have to support all the tooling behind that source set versus what you get for free from the Kotlin plugin, the Kotlin multi-platform plugin, AGP. Like it's really groundbreaking work, and it's just adding more surface area for maintenance, which I'm very mindful of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a thing? You mentioned the running on with Robolectric and have problems. There was someone in the chat asking earlier, what are your thoughts on Roborazzi, if you have any?
I don't have any.
Okay.
I'm familiar with the project existing. I think it came out around the time Paparazzi did, and I think at some point it started with the Paparazzi source and then quickly diverged with its implementation. I have not followed the project closely. I know that it exists, and I know that one major benefit from people who have used it so far has been that it has chosen to go the Robolectric native graphics approach. So talking a little bit about that, Paparazzi early on decided to use layoutlib because that's what we saw in the repo, and we know that it powers that feature in the IDE. At some point, Robolectric was doing their kind of approach to mocking Android and using shadows. I think at some point, layoutlib moved to a JNI library versus a pure Java library because they wanted to. They were just frustrated with text rendering issues. They were literally calculating how.
Tell me about that.
Occurred from scratch, right? And so TLDR layoutlib wanted to use the true Skia rendering pipeline that devices and emulators use, and to do so, you had to make it JNI compatible. It did. Robolectric follows suit. Again, not too much of an expert in this area, but I believe they did something similar but different to make Robolectric native graphics. And I know that some people wanted to shift over to that, and Roborazzi provides that. Will Paparazzi move over to Robolectric native graphics as well? RNG for short. Again, not opposed to it, but part of the selling point that I think is really important is people develop in the IDE and use Compose previews and love Compose previews. Like I've not seen many developers go, I hate Compose previews. And so there is a benefit for Paparazzi using the same facility that Compose previews uses, and with that, take the good with the bad. Like layoutlib and Compose preview bugs will become our bugs, but it makes the overall community better. I don't know if we switched over to Robolectric native graphics, whether bug triaging, because we all will have bugs in our respective implementations, will be harder. Bug triaging will be harder by using something that you aren't seeing in the IDE. If you're working in the IDE and you're running the tests in the IDE, then I'd like there to be some consistency across whatever implementation does the rendering.
Yeah.
So that kind of
ideally the gold screenshot that comes out of Paparazzi should be identical on the same machine to the preview you get in Studio.
Yeah, and I can't say there's been, at least if I had to hand wave 50% of issues that got filed in Paparazzi. You know, one of the things we ask is like, what version of the IDE are you seeing? They'll say, hey, we see this in Compose preview, we see this in whatever, and we'll download that version of the IDE if it's an older version of the IDE, and we'll see that, oh, actually that bug is with preview and it's been fixed. It was working in that version of the IDE -1 and is working in +1. So the action is don't do anything because it's already fixed. We just need to bump layoutlib and Paparazzi and that'll quote unquote solve it. And so that's a hell of a lot better than really trying to spend time in figuring out like, oh, okay, what's wrong with our rendering engine? So, and it's also, I mean, I don't want to just rely on that. I've spoken to the developers at Google at various points who maintain layoutlib or work orthogonally with it because it's a core part of the IDE. And there's no, at least current trend, I don't want to speak for Google employees, but there's no like current trend to drop it. Like if Android Studio said we're going to drop layoutlib and move to Robolectric native graphics, then we would follow suit as well, because then again, in spirit of having that one unified rendering thing. But if they do not, it conversely doesn't seem like we would either. I would love to, though, you know, just for the purposes of discussion, hear like why today those benefits of moving to RNG as the backing rendering engine is desirable. I know, for example, it was a reason why Uber did it. I forget why. So if either Uber people or people at other companies who had similar decisions made can help inform me, I think maybe just more insight into that would be helpful. But yeah, that's kind of the stance at the moment, if that
Is
makes
that
sense.
a Thai question? Should we ask Thai to come back? To come and then we can have this discussion. I think
Should have call
might
in.
be interesting.
You should have people call in at various points.
I mean, you
I
know,
feel like
the like in quizzes, like phone home and ask for help from home or something.
yeah, I'm gonna use my lifeline. Hi, what?
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. That was a bit of a diversion, but I was also curious because I've never used Roborazzi and I don't even know what the difference is. So now I know. It uses RNG, which is very random. I'll stop here.
I think it also uses a similar resource qualifier setup to just figuring out which like again resource qualification. Right now we expose an API in Paparazzi to say, hey, if you want to do RTL based locales or like different landscape versus portrait configurations, there's a way to do it. I am not going to defend the API that Paparazzi has at the moment. I think that's one of the things we really want to explore in the rewrite in 2.0. Like the Paparazzi API is great and it works, but it could be much better. And so that's what I think the 2.0 release will allow us to kind of finally kind of dig into, given the fact that we're going to break stuff and hopefully release alphas often so that people can weigh in on those API changes. But we'd like, if you're familiar with like the Square Cache way of developing open source libraries, having something that's easily configurable is just the modus operandi.
Yeah, I'm kind of like I'm curious to see where this goes with 2.0, but also like how would you say the 2.0 is like I don't know because I'll be honest, I don't keep an eye on the Paparazzi repo. I ask you when I have questions because that's my easy way out. But the 2.0 effort, how far along is it, I guess, is the question.
It's so as I mentioned, the preview stuff is underway. It's been away for a while, so that'll land right after we cut this release. And then the SDK-ifying work, we have a couple of other PRs or spikes on how to do that. So really, like it will be underway shortly. I will have to speak with the other contributors to find out what timelines are towards that effort. So it's kind of a little up in the air. But I'd like to try to have, at least in this last quarter of the year, if not several alphas out based on some of those changes. And some of these changes are going to require like a bit of work. Like how are we going to work with ASM? How can we rip out the interceptor model? Moving Paparazzi into like something like a builder pattern. How do we actually use Paparazzi on the command line where we won't have an easy way to pass that Android state? Like the working CLI sample that I have for Paparazzi works, but it has a lot of hard-coded file paths into my Gradle cache transform directory for layout lib and all that stuff. How do you gather that information without Android Gradle plugin being on your build class path? I think is really kind of the blocking factor. What do you do with resources? Do you represent resources in a different way? Because layout lib is going to provide you things for the Android platform classes, but anything Android X, it won't, because Android X is not part of the Android platform and therefore not part of layout lib. A very kind of recent example of that is, for a long time, if you used Android X resources compat and loaded a font via that, we would use a font interceptor to coerce you to use the platform load font, which isn't great. It was like 98% okay, but then if you use certain theme setups, it wouldn't work. And we just didn't fix that bug until relatively recently. And the way that we fixed that is we had another ASM transform to accomplish. So again, it's how do we or we get layout lib maintainers to include Android X stuff as part of that. That might be another conversation. We don't really know. And that's part of the fun of what we'll be figuring out for the 2.0 landscape. Snapshot browser was another thing. It'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. So I think preview annotations, SDK-ifying, JUnit 5 support, and snapshot browser are just 4 things that I think will be some nice features to add in the 2.0, and I'm sure we'll have a few more that'll come along the way. If there's something that I haven't mentioned and viewers really think would be a nice 2.0 feature to have, including Docker support provided by Ivan, then have at it. File some issues or feature requests.
Yeah, and I heard that Ivan is also volunteering to do the web-based snapshot viewer, whatever it needs. Whatever it
the
needs.
multi-platform, multi-platform support. I'm
Yes.
taking care of it.
You forget the Gradle plugin for the Docker.
No, why not the Bazel plugin?
So I know we're almost at time. But one thing I want to call out is the last time I was on this podcast, I never really successfully got Paparazzi working in the bundle project. Anyone who was watching that saw that went from let's learn about Paparazzi to like let's watch J-Rod sweat and try to debug an unknown repo. And I will say that a huge part of that was the fact that I didn't do my homework ahead of time. Paparazzi did not have an app module support before. Paparazzi required you to be a library module. And so part of the pain was refactoring stuff out of that. Now, today, Paparazzi does support app modules. But I also think that since then, one of you or somebody else refactored some of the UI out of the app module. So it's
that would have been Paul. Yeah. Because back in the day, it was like, oh, no, I can help with that. Or like, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So I pushed a draft PR on the repo. I think, Seb, you saw this a little while ago. That shows the idea there was luckily to show how lightweight introducing Paparazzi into your repo can be. So yeah, take a look at that if you want to screen share it. Otherwise, it's just, the typical stuff. Put in a new dependency, apply a plugin, write a simple test.
Actually, let's quickly take a look. So
you look at the files change at the top, or
I was looking at what the warning was. It was like, oh, it's just an old HTTP.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yep. So applying, I see you're using the modern Gradle APIs. There was some simple version stuff because LayoutLib appends itself to compile SDK versions. So I bumped the compile SDK version because there's no way to kind of span a range of compile SDKs. You must be on a certain compile SDK for a particular Paparazzi version.
Yeah.
But this is really it. This test right here is the heart of it. I did shrink mode. That's one of the probably things you want to change from an API perspective. If you want something not to be a full screen snapshot, but rather a widget-based snapshot, you have to use rendering mode.shrink, which tells the canvas to shrink to the minimum bounds necessary to take the snapshot. I know, terrible naming. We just led that implementation from LayoutLib. We could probably do better. But if putting that aside, have those 2 snapshot tests there, and then voila, if you scroll down, there you have it.
Nice.
With the introduction of the preview annotations, you'll see that I don't do the light mode, dark mode support here today. To do that, I noticed in the previews for these particular widgets, you slapped on preview parameters to tell it, like, I forget what it's called, but like configuration UI mode, dark or whatever.
Possibly.
Yeah, so the previews do that, but I don't capture that here. With the preview annotation, it should do that for you. And so what that should look like is you slap @paparazzi annotation in your preview code, and it soon will generate test sources that then you'll run with your manual test sources and generate the snapshots. But long term, once we get SDK-ifying working, it'd be nice to eliminate the test source generation completely and just snapshot from the preview. So either way, if you write a preview and you like iterating with your previews, you should also, with just applying a annotation, get the extra snapshot facility for free if you didn't already use Google's version of the plugin.
Cool. That's really cool. Thank you for going back and implementing this.
No, you're welcome. If anything, I feel like that was definitely an itch I had to scratch just because how embarrassing,
And now,
how
now I'm
embarrassed I was
done.
going through that process. I was like, no, I got to make this work.
Well, but that's kind. We appreciate, and it's just a few lines of code, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very
It's
pleased. I remember last time I was dealing with like Dagger Hilt and God knows what. I mean, again, I didn't even go watch that episode. I usually like to look over my talks to see like what went well, what didn't. But I was just like, nope, I'm just gonna
I'm
delete
just
this
gonna do it.
line. You guys are great. I just was more like me, like just
Oh
not
no,
being
dude.
into the cold.
no.
So there's one thing that we do is that we all fail the same. We all have our moments where things don't work,
Yeah.
and then the next day they work, or the next day you figure out why they don't work, and eventually you fix the bug, and then they work. So
Yeah.
it's always been one of the things that we enjoy about doing these streams is that sometimes things don't work, and that's
Don't
fine
work.
because
Yes.
that's your life. Like as a software engineer, sometimes things just don't fucking work, and
Yeah.
that's
And live coding is hard. I've only
yeah.
seen two people do live coding really well. Christina Lee and Wen Dao. They're amazing at it. They've been doing it for quite a while. I would be fearful to attempt the types of talks that they give because I feel like I would just trip over. I can't even speak now. I'm stuttering. Imagine if I were doing a live coding session at a conference.
It's very,
You know,
very difficult.
yeah, it's very very intense
and risky.
So well, I mean, especially when you are dealing with so complex systems, right? I mean, Android apps are not hello worlds anymore. Like, if you, it's a lot. Even the hello word is intense.
Yeah.
Try pulling an image from the internet, right? That's the thing. So now you need a library, and now you start pulling library like there is no tomorrow. But yeah.
You mean you don't bash curl wget some array bytes over the wire and use bitmap factory to deserialize? You don't do that?
Only on weekends.
No.
Not for my day job.
I don't do that anymore. But yeah, thank you for this. Is actually cool, Sebastiano. We need to probably also add to the README because why not, right?
We need to
It's also
merge this PR first. But it's a draft, so I cannot do it.
It could be a backlink to Paparazzi as well.
I mean, I'd be happy to. If I don't know how much traffic this repo gets, to be honest. So paying in exposure probably doesn't work. But still, I'm very happy that we closed that thing that was hanging there in the background. We're just ignoring it, but now it's fixed, and that's great.
Fixed.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Ivan,
thank you a lot. Yes, no, I was actually thinking, and I was like, we need to do this again when the 2.0 comes out. So just throw a calendar somewhere.
I mean, let's wait for them to know when it comes out first.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, deadlines are hard.
It's always a good idea for knowing when you're gonna ship, so you can schedule stuff. Yeah.
Unless you need a good motivation for a hard deadline for shipping.
No, let's not do that.
No. I go back and forth on that of conference-driven development or interview-driven development. And yeah, I don't know.
It's not a good idea.
It's usually my Oura ring just shows me how much it's not good for me these days.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
So
well,
go ahead.
No, I'm sure. Should we wrap up?
Yes, I was just about to say that, John, for those that will be in DroidCon London, you are giving a talk there about Paparazzi.
Yes.
So
it'll be an updated version of the New York talk. It will not be the same. Hopefully between now and then, again, conference-driven development coming up again. But yeah, come check it out if you're in the area or watch the videos once they're posted.
We all know what is bad for us, and we still do it anyway. That's the summary of this episode.
Nice.
Ivan?
So thank you, everybody. Thank you for being with us in the chat. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for sticking with us. Hit like and subscribe if you want to support us to
Ring the
print
bell?
stickers. Also ring the bell for the notification, of course.
Oh my god, this doesn't get any less cringe.
No, I mean, that's how YouTube works. Why are you?
Fair enough.
So if you want to support us for free and you have Amazon Prime, just connect your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account. You will see a toggle on our channel that says subscribe for free. You will support the channel with the, we print stickers that we give away at conferences. So if you are in London or in Milan, or if you are at any dev fest in the North Italy area, just reach out and you can get some stickers for free. Thank you again. And I guess, Sebastian, do we have anybody next week?
We have Roberto next week. So
okay.
What happened is, I read the news that there is like on Pixel tablet with Android 15 something, I don't know. There is like a desktop mode in the Android beta, and I tried it and I was like, oh, that's actually cool. But I don't know anything about it. I don't know what I need to do to make my app work on it. So let's see next week with Roberto. Does it work? What do you need to do? And what happens if you were one of those people that block configuration changes Duolingo and someone enables the desktop mode? That was a low blow, sorry.
Give the man a break. So let's see what Roberto brings in.
Or bricks.
For bricks in. Don't you have dinner or anything?
Yeah, sorry, let's go. Bye.
John, thank you again. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for having me. Take care.